Good evening. We're on the air again with another edition of Pachios On the News. Just another edition, not much happening, but we'll try to come up with something interesting. An incredible day in America. Perhaps the most unusual day in American history. Certainly the most unusual president-elect in American history. Now you're saying, what is he talking about? You know, we've had a lot of presidents. This guy's the 45th president. What is he talking about the most unusual? Well, this man is, based on what he says, based on what he has done in life, based on his experience. We've always had people run for president, and every president that's been elected has had some experience in the art of governing, either in the military or in politics, some more than others. But never have we had one who absolutely has no experience in managing the complicated days that confront a leader, a political leader in Washington, D.C. I'm an optimist. I'm a guy who says, okay, I've been around a long time. I've been in politics a long time. My first campaign was 1964. I worked for that president, Lyndon Johnson. I worked throughout that campaign, in that election. I know a lot of politicians. I've been involved in presidential politics ever since 1964. And I'm not a guy who goes around and saying, oh, we've got to do, you know, we've got to resist this guy. We've got to resist this new leader. I'm a guy, unlike some of the Republicans who hated Mr. Obama, who couldn't stand Mr. Obama from the day he was sworn in, who said, we hope he fails. And many Republican politicians in Washington said, we hope he fails. I hope Donald Trump succeeds. He's the only president I have. This is the only country that I live in. And so I hope our new president succeeds, and I'll be pulling for him. Now, can we predict? Everybody's in the business of predicting now. I want to start reading something, and I want to set the tone for this program and then kind of play off of this. We have with us tonight a terrific guest, Greg Kesich, who is the head of the editorial pages of the Portland Press-Herald. Some of you who read the Portland Press-Herald will say, oh, no, that's a liberal newspaper. And some of you will say, Greg Kesich, he writes these op-ed pieces and sometimes editorials that are not that liberal. Hard to predict. Greg, you are hard to predict. That's why I want you on this program.
Oh, good, because this was hard to predict.
This was hard to predict.
Was hard to predict, yeah.
So I'm going to start by reading something that Andrew Sullivan wrote, and then we can talk a little bit about it. This is kind of depressing, what he wrote, and I just said, look, I'm hoping the president succeeds, the new president succeeds, and I want to talk about that, but I want to set the tone by by quoting what Andrew Sullivan, a conservative writer and columnist, quite a conservative writer and columnist, is saying about what happened last night, and then play off of it and then get some of your views on some of these things. But first, let me read what Sullivan, apparently at 3 or 4 this morning, stayed up to write. We are witnessing the power of a massive populist movement that has now upended the 2 most stable democracies in the world and thrown both countries into a completely unknown future. In Britain, where the polls did not pick up the latent support for withdrawal from the European Union, a new prime minister is now navigating a new social contract with the indigenous middle and working classes, forged by fear of immigration and globalization in Britain. In the U.S., the movement built on anti-political politics. That's a good phrase, anti-political politics. What he's saying is it's all politics. Economic disruption economic disruption. That's what part of this is. And anti-immigrant fears, definitely what part of it is. Had something else far more lethal than what happened in Britain in its bag of tricks. A supremely talented demagogue who created an authoritarian cult with unapologetically neo-fascist rhetoric. That's how he describes the man who won the U.S. presidency last night. Britain is reeling toward a slow economic slide. America has now jumped off a constitutional cliff. It will never be the same country again. Like Brexit, this changes the core nature of this country permanently, he says. This is now Trump's America. He controls everything from here on forward. He has won this campaign in such a decisive fashion that he owes no one anything. He has destroyed the GOP and remade it in his own image. He has humiliated the elites and the elite media. He has embarrassed every pollster and naysayer. He has avenged Obama. And in the coming weeks, Trump will not likely be content to bask in vindication. He will seek unforgiving revenge on those who dared to oppose him. The party apparatus will be remade in his image. The House and Senate will fail to resist anything he proposes, and those who speak up will be primaried into oblivion. The Supreme Court may well be shifted to the far right for generations to come. Almost certainly, as in Britain, the left, already radicalized, will respond by moving even farther left, leaving the now openly revanchist right far more radical than the Tory government in Britain, with total control over the levers of power. They will not let those levers go easily. They will build a propaganda machine more powerful than Fox and Breitbart, and generate pseudo-stories and big lies that, absent any authoritative or trusted media, will dominate the centers of information. And then he says, but maybe there's hope, because he can't keep his promises. He can't do the things that he said he was going to do. And then he says, but hope fades in turn when you realize how absolute and total his support clearly is. His support is not like that of a democratic leader, but of a cult leader, fused with the idea of the nation. If he fails, as he will blame others, as he almost always does. And his cult followers will take their cue from him and no one else. In Trump we trust. In Trump we trust, as his acolyte Ann Coulter titled her new book. And so there will have to be scapegoats. Media, institutions, the Fed, the global conspiracy of bankers, and Davos muckety-mucks he previewed in his rankly anti-Semitic closing ad. And it goes on. And it's depressing. And it depressed me to read it. And I gave it to Greg to read.
Yeah.
So what do you think of all of this?
Well, he gets to the cheerful part at the end. You skip that, where we put aside partisanship, and the institutions of government and society stand up and prevent him from exerting a kind of fascist control.
And these are institutions of society that include Republicans and Democrats,
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that Republicans have as much desire to preserve the Republic and our institutions as Democrats.
Sure. Yeah, that's the argument he makes, and I think that's true. I think what he doesn't say is what we saw in a poll this summer that we did in Maine, that pretty much all of our institutions are on their heels. People don't have a lot of trust in institutions. They don't have a lot of faith in political parties, labor unions, business. They don't think, they feel they can't trust business. There's a lot of anti-corporate feeling on both the right and the left. And so who is it that's going to be able to stand up against a Trump? And the one institution that got really high rates for trust was the military. And
so Trump tapped into all of this.
Yeah.
He tapped him, and he is instinctively, he doesn't know anything about government, but instinctively he knows what's going on with these people. And he pressed every single button.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? There wasn't a button he missed.
Right.
And all of those buttons add up to one thing: fear. Creating fear and insecurity among people.
Fear of outsiders, fear of somebody's taking advantage of you.
Fear of everything.
Yeah, no, it's...
And it works.
It does. And, we say, like, oh, he hit all these buttons and nobody else has really hit them. It's kind of irresponsible to hit them because he doesn't have any solutions for these problems. He just pokes at them.
No solutions.
Yeah.
Just believe me, trust me, it's going to be beautiful.
And to make it back like it was in the 50s.
And it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be the best.
Right.
And I think, there's a lot of people that buy it. Somebody says it's going to be the best. Oh, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
That's what I want, is the best. But, Greg, you touched on something. You touched on kind of the left and the right.
Yeah.
Thinking that, Wall Street's rigged, everything's rigged against them. 2, 3, 4 years ago, probably, I had a guy on who was the self-proclaimed leader of the Tea Party movement in Maine when it first started. Very interesting guy. And then I had later on somebody who was, associated with the Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
And after I heard them both, I said, you guys are angry at the same people.
Yeah.
You're angry at the same people. It's like a full circle. Here on the left, on the extreme left and the extreme right, they have the same grievances.
Right.
Is that part of what's happening here?
I haven't seen the numbers that say that circle has been completed, but it is a lot. You hear a lot of the same rhetoric. People who supported Bernie Sanders say there was some overlap with kind of some of the things that Trump says, not in terms of the policy, but in terms of sort of analysis of what the problem is.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some commonality in those groups.
So we have we certainly have the same issue in Maine, the same types of divisions. And let me ask you about the divisions. How in our country and in Maine, what divides us? Gender, one of them?
Gender is one. I'm not sure exactly how it plays out in Maine, as well as I could from this campaign, because Trump was so demeaning to women and had crossed so many boundaries with women that it became, you couldn't avoid it. And obviously he was running against a woman, so that we looked at that divide. But I think the one I see in the polls today, from yesterday, the exit polls, and what you see around the state here is there's a big divide between college-educated workers and non-college educated workers. And it's not because the people in college, they taught you something that makes you smarter. And it just means the kind of jobs you get and the kinds of opportunities that are available are so much greater than people who didn't go to college. And in the past, we're able to get these, good paying industrial middle-class jobs, paper mills, factories, what have you. So that's a divide. And we always, you hear people fretting about how Maine has one of the highest rates of people without a higher education in the country and certainly in New England, and how that's a real impediment to our economic development. I think it also plays out in our politics. And we saw it yesterday for the first time ever. We divided the electoral college votes. There's one vote going to Trump, and it's never happened before. And I think you'll see where those votes came from are the rural towns, the former mill towns, the current mill towns, where people used to be able to make a living, good living, without a college degree, and now they can't.
I'm glad I'm glad you brought that up because I have a couple of statistics that our viewers will find interesting. Former mill towns. East Millinocket, Trump 54%, Clinton 41%, 13-point spread. That's a Democratic town. That was solid Democrat all the years that I was in politics. It was so dependable, Democratic politicians hardly showed up there.
Yeah.
It was just automatic. Millinocket, next town, also with its own paper mill. 53 Trump, 41 Clinton, double digits for Clinton, for Trump. Medway, same area, Millinocket Mills area. 70% of the vote for Trump, 31% for Clinton. 40-point difference. Mm-hmm. Mike Michaud's hometown, automatic Democratic votes in the old days. Unbelievable figures. Rumford, Maine, the heart of the Democrats in Oxford County, 50% for Trump, 40% for Clinton. And now,
you see John Patrick lost his race.
John Patrick, the state senator, lost.
And hardcore pro-labor.
Pro-labor, mill, works in the mill.
Yeah.
Absolutely, he lost. And when I was growing up here, a long time ago, incidentally, when I first registered to vote, Eisenhower was in the middle of his second term. And every town around here, the suburban towns, were heavily Republican. My father told me when I went to register in Cape Elizabeth in 1958, he said, you got to register as a Democrat because, as a Republican, there are no Democrats in Cape Elizabeth. Right. So we told you what happened in the mill towns, the old Democratic towns, in the election yesterday. Now, how about this? Falmouth, Clinton 62%, Trump 33%. 30-point difference. Cumberland, Clinton 60%, Trump 33%, almost 30-point difference. Cape Elizabeth, the town that had no Democrats when I went to register, 70% for Clinton, 25% for Trump. And now I'll give you a couple more examples. Mm-hmm. Kennebunkport, down in York County, a Republican town. 57% for Clinton, 38% for Trump. 19-point difference for Clinton in Kennebunkport. And Sanford, a mill town, where all the Democrats were in York County. 50% for Trump, 41% for Clinton. And then my last example are two towns that are right next to each other. Bucksport, a mill town, and Blue Hill. The towns actually adjoin. They have a common border. So these people live near each other.
Right.
In Bucksport, 52% for Trump. Another Democratic town, now 52% for Trump, 40% for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
The Republican won by 12 percentage points. In the next town, Blue Hill, 61% for Clinton, 31% for Trump. 30% difference for Clinton. Towns that adjoin.
Right.
All illustrating what you said has been happening in Maine.
And I guess that also illustrates why we're so surprised because we're in Portland and we're hanging around in the area of Portland, and if we were in Rumford or Bucksport, this result might not have looked like such a shock.
People would have.
Everybody you talk to would have been saying, 60%, 70% of them would be saying, I'm going to vote for Trump.
And a partner in my firm had to go to Castine last week. He came back and said to me, every lawn has a Trump sign.
Right.
They all have Trump signs. So
if you asked a Democrat about that, they'd say that they were phasing out signs. They were charging a lot of money to sell people signs, and that they didn't think that they were good use of resources. And they would, if somebody came in to buy a sign, they would try to recruit them to talk on the phones or go door to door. So it's a...
So Greg, hasn't this been coming on for a while in our country? I think back, I worked in the 1968 campaign for president. I worked for Ed Muskie, who was the Democratic vice presidential candidate. George Mitchell. I'm about to mention somebody who's no George Mitchell. George Wallace was an independent candidate for president. He won 7 states, 7 southern states in that general election. He got 20 million votes. And the people that were for him used to be Democrats, mostly blue-collar people, mostly people with just a high school education or less, but they were for him. That was racial.
And well, he won states in the South, but he did very well with those voters in the North. He in Milwaukee and
Wisconsin. He did very well.
Yeah,
that was racial.
Yep. We
have some of that still. I think we have a lot.
I think we do. I mean, I think it's really hard to talk about because it makes people feel like you're criticizing them for being racist, and they look in their heart.
You get very defensive.
And they say, I don't have any prejudice. Personally don't have any prejudice. But it's not really a matter of personal prejudice. It's a social system, and a lot of these Rust Belt cities that were built around factories were the workers in the factories were predominantly white, and it wasn't just an accident. It was the way that people operated, companies operated, unions operated, and they had a high interest in preserving their jobs, and they saw the arrival of blacks coming from the South as a kind of the way people talk about immigration today, and so that's the subtext for that kind of campaign that Wallace ran in the 60s. And I think, yes, we do see the same kind of thing. And what it is there's an anxiety. You're going to lose something that you had. And somebody's coming along and saying, here's the bad guy. And I think that's one of the key elements of Trump is why he's so successful is he doesn't just tell you what's wrong, he tells you whose fault it is.
That's important.
Yeah. And people like that. Who doesn't? It's nice to know.
And it's not new. I mean, a lot of people have scapegoats are very important,
sure.
And people react to that message. In 1924, the United States Congress passed an immigration law that essentially excluded people from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe.
Right.
Same thing. It had been building up for a decade and a half during this great migration to the United States by workers, peasants. Yeah. And people were just afraid. They said their jobs were being taken. Who are these people? Different customs. Right. They're not like me. They look different than me. And so the Congress responded.
And there was also a wave of terrorism that people forget about. And it was a number of bombings, including
radicals,
and many of them were Jewish,
and Italian,
and they identified Jews as somebody to exclude because they were afraid of terrorist activities in the 20s.
The Congress responded and did exclude them.
Yeah,
and we had that. We had George Wallace, and we had Richard Nixon, a lot of these working people who were traditional Democrats, Union people, Roosevelt Democrats. Yeah. They went for Nixon because all the kids, the liberal kids, they thought were in the streets making trouble, and law and order became the issue.
Yeah.
But what fascinates me is those people in Bucksport or East Millinocket, whatever, they're for Trump. They think Trump is going to deliver something.
Right.
And then most of the Republicans, they said, came home and voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
Now, what those traditional Republicans, many of whom are business people, are interested in is lower taxes.
Right.
They are interested in how they can make more money through reducing government regulation and so forth.
Right.
And these people in Millinocket and Bucksport and East Millinocket, they don't care about lower taxes. They're not getting hit with lower taxes. They have nothing in common that way. So now, think about this. The populists, and they say this was a popular wave that swept Trump into office, they say the system is rigged. Wall Street is rigged.
Right.
They're the people that are causing the problems. They're the people that brought us down in 2008. Wall Street, all these elites with the suspenders down there in New York. And the question is, will Donald Trump try to unrig the system for these people? These are Bernie people too. Apparently not. He has said many times he wants to repeal Dodd-Frank, the securities industry regulatory laws. He says he wants to significantly reduce regulation of banks. These people in Millinocket and East Millinocket and Bucksport, they don't care about whether bank regulation is strict or not. I mean, they want it strict. They don't care about freeing the banks up.
Right. I don't think the appeal is so much on specific policy. I think what he offers is what people say is he's going to shake it up. He's going to make things change. He's going to shake
it up by helping the bankers.
Right. I mean, I agree with that, but I think
you agree there's an inconsistency.
Yes, absolutely. Right. I mean, there's been very little sort of what I think of as economic conservatism in the Trump campaign. He rarely says anything that sounds like Paul Ryan. You know, he's very generous when he's offering benefits. He says Social Security is going to be preserved at current levels. He you know, talks about, a little confusing what he says about health care, but it sounds like what he's saying.
He's going to repeal Obamacare.
But he also wants some kind of universal coverage.
He says he's going to come up with a plan. Nobody's
going to die in the street, right?
But there's no plan.
Right.
There will be. He'll have to come up with a plan if he's going to reduce Obamacare, but it'll be invented sometime in the future. However, some of these people who have been laid off from their jobs in these places in Maine that went heavily for Trump are on Obamacare.
Right.
They're on Obamacare. He's going to repeal it.
Right.
He's going to help Wall Street. He's already said he wants to repeal Dodd-Frank. Okay? That doesn't do them any good. His fans up there. Talk about tax policy. Now, what he wants to do, I'm reading here from a summary from the Tax Policy Center, which is a very reliable, serious study group. They estimate that his tax breaks, mostly for the rich, it would benefit me, incidentally. I don't regard myself as rich, but what he has proposed explicitly in his tax plan will make me a lot of money. It will reduce my taxes considerably. Okay.
And you'll spread it out throughout the community, right?
Yeah, that's the theory. That's the theory. But the Tax Policy Center says, you know, they like some of this because it's a business group, and they think it'll stimulate business. But they say that they estimate the proposal would reduce federal revenues by $9.5 trillion in the next 10 years. $9.5 trillion. Now,
what's the national debt now?
I don't know what it is, but
something like that.
He says, what Trump says, he wants those revenues to be reduced by that amount. And he says he wants to increase military spending. He doesn't want to take away any Social Security benefits. He don't want to take away benefits from anybody.
Right. He's got a child care plan.
Except the child care
That's going to cost a lot. Infrastructure.
He said it in his victory speech, which I thought was very good today. He said, what we're going to do in this country, you watch me, he said. What we're going to do in this country is we're going to build roads and bridges and tunnels and hospitals and schools, and we're going to have an infrastructure second to none. Now that kind of appealed to me. We're going to put all these people to work building infrastructure with public money. When Obama suggested that, the Republicans in the Congress were horrified.
Right.
They said, over our dead body. Now, what are they going to do with this guy? Are they going to say over our dead body? Or are they going to say, no, we're going to build it. We're going to reduce these revenues by $10 trillion. And what about the deficits? The holy grail of Republican politicians. Deficit reduction.
Sure. Except for when they're in office.
Except for when they're in office.
They,
so I'm going to say to people watching this, I'm not going after Donald Trump now. I'm raising questions, and I'm interested to see what will happen. No one watching this tonight, Greg, is oblivious to the fact that the Republicans in Congress stand firmly for deficit reduction.
Right.
The question is, what will they do about all of this infrastructure spending, which I favor, all of this tax reduction, which is good for me? What will they do about that? Because the deficit's going to soar, as it did when Ronald Reagan was president.
Yep.
So I'm interested to see how consistent the Republicans in Congress will be.
Do you think I mean, some Republicans have just gotten elected because of their association with Trump, and they may stick with him on this. And I wonder how willing the Democrats are going to be to work with him on something like that, like an infrastructure project that they would have liked to have passed.
That's a very good question. Will the Democrats, just to be obstructionists, try to stop this infrastructure program, for instance? Will they cry deficit?
But are they, will they cry deficit, or will they be looking, there's another election in 2 years, and did they want to be the ones that didn't bring home the bridge project or the...
So you're saying that there are some new members of Congress who were carried in on the Trump wave?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would think so. I mean, some distance themselves from him, and others cozy it up.
Well, I would say Bruce Poliquin was helped by that was a very competitive campaign. He was helped by the Trump wave in northern Maine.
Yes.
It was impossible not to be helped by it.
Right.
But I don't think he prides himself on being a deficit hawk.
He's a deficit hawk.
So I will be very interested in what Bruce Poliquin, our 2nd District Congressman, does about infrastructure spending, he'll be all for reducing taxes.
Right.
But will he be for spending the money to build bridges and schools and hospitals?
And will the Speaker only let votes go that have the support of the majority of the caucus, the Hastert rule, which I don't think they call it that anymore.
That's what they call it.
That was,
right.
Yeah. So, I mean, how are they going to let these things go ahead and have some kind of coalition of Democrats and Republicans, or are they going to obstruct Trump?
Look, the Republicans have been well funded by business interests, by the Koch brothers and so forth, and they've espoused many of these business ideals and programs. Lower taxes, trickle-down economics.
And smaller government.
And smaller government, okay?
These aren't small government ideas.
All of the things that Trump does not stand for.
Yeah.
They have, these Republicans have adopted. Now, here's the big one. These big business Republicans, carrying water for the Koch brothers and others, are free trade people.
Yeah.
These trade agreements are very important for American business. Donald Trump promises to trash these trade agreements.
Right.
He promises to trash them. What he says is, we'll make a much better deal. Like the Chinese don't know how to make a deal. We'll see. But we may have a trade war, and that will be an anathema to the Republican business interests who support these Republican members of Congress. We're going to see a very important show here coming up between Republicans in Congress who have stood traditionally for things that Donald Trump is against.
Right.
It's going to be fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is.
So,
and you know, the thing you said, you started out by saying how the voters in the mill towns are not, they don't care about higher taxes. But they've been very successful, the Republicans, about selling that higher taxes or lower taxes mantra to the point where people who don't actually pay federal income tax list it as an important issue to them.
They do. They buy that even though they don't even pay the tax.
Yeah. And we had that, I remember in 2012, we did a series of profiles, and there was a kid in somewhere up in the mid-coast who worked packing lobsters in boxes, and it was, he was working around the clock, and he was making minimum wage, 20 years old, and the reporter asked him, "Who are you going to vote for?" He says, "I haven't decided. Whoever's going to lower my taxes." And you just want to say, "Kid, don't worry about it. Your problem is solved. You don't pay any taxes."
Well, not only that.
I mean, not income tax. You paid some payroll tax.
But Democrats.
But nobody's going to touch that.
No, but the Democrats are the ones that want to lower. They keep proposing lowering the rates at the lower levels, but not at the top level.
Right.
The top level for the rich. They want to go after the rich.
Right.
They want to, like this 3% surcharge thing, that was put on by the teachers union.
Yeah.
But a lot of people voted for that, and I'll bet a lot of those, if you look at the towns where Trump won big, I'll bet that won big too, the 3% surcharge in taxes.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be interesting when people begin to think, well, wait a minute, what's he doing for us?
Right.
We're the ones that put him in the White House.
Yeah.
Now he's playing footsie with these Republicans in Congress that are proposing things that don't do anything for us.
Uh-huh.
Fact of the matter is, what you said, the only way that he can help those people is big government. Now he says, no, that's not the only way I can help people. I can put an end to some of these crazy trade agreements and bring the steel industry back, the paper industry back. You think there's a chance of that happening?
No, nobody does. And the other thing, I don't know that the people who voted for him think he can bring it back either. He's kind of like a weapon. It's their revenge on the system.
It's their hand grenade.
Yeah, the system has treated them badly, and they're not looking at a brighter future than yesterday was, and so they send Donald Trump to Washington. I don't think that people are really expecting him to revive manufacturing.
But aren't they going to say after a couple of years, okay, he continues to insult people. I mean, he has a routine.
Right.
He tries to diminish everybody else, to create scapegoats. But aren't they going to say, okay, I enjoy the scapegoating. I enjoy him insulting everybody. But I got a problem. I'm out of work in Millinocket, Maine.
Right.
What's he doing for me?
Well, he's yelling at people you don't like.
Okay. That's a good point. He's yelling at people that I don't like, and that makes me feel better.
Yeah.
I don't get a job. I may not get as much unemployment insurance as I used to.
Uh-huh.
And the Wall Street guys are raking it in while I'm suffering. But at least he's condemning all the people I want condemned.
Right.
You think that's what makes
I think that's got to be part of it. Yeah, sure. Because, these people that live in these towns, they know a lot about these businesses. If you talk to them, they know all about sort of the corporate structure of the paper companies, and they understand the global market and why decisions are made. They're not happy about it, but they don't feel like they were treated fairly. But they have a very sophisticated understanding of the business compared to people who don't work in those fields.
So these are people, part of it, there's a lot of components to what happened,
Yeah.
but part of it is people wanting to blow up a system. Blow it up.
Yeah. Right. A system that's not working for them.
A system that's not working.
And the other thing to remember is if you're in one of these areas, you're looking at the TV and you hear about this recovery. I have a little experience with this myself because I work in a disrupted industry.
Yes, you do.
Newspapers, and I keep hearing reading.
And where pay is going down.
Pay is stuck. It's stagnant. Jobs have disappeared over the years, I read in my own paper. I read stories about the recovery and how wages are going up.
Not yours.
Not mine personally, but others in my community. So I can understand what it must be like to live in a town where you are now working as a as a CNA in a nursing home instead of in a paper plant, and you're reading about how the economy has turned around and everything's okay, and there's 200,000 jobs a month coming on, and it's not coming to you.
Aren't we walking into the dark now with this guy? I mean, we've elected this guy. We're just walking into the night in the dark because he's our agent to blow up everything, but we don't know what it's going to be replaced with.
Right.
We have no idea
No.
what's going to happen. Not a single person watching this program, and several, I'm sure, voted for Donald Trump, have any idea what this blown-up system is going to be replaced by.
Yeah.
But it won't be replaced. It may be replaced with lower taxes, but it won't be replaced by prudent deficit management. It won't be replaced by, global trade.
Right.
It may not be replaced with anything.
Yes. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, when people say they want to go back to the 1950s, what was the tax rate then? It was around 90% at the top.
It was 90% when I registered to vote. The top rate was 90%.
And
John Kennedy, it was all 90% all during Eisenhower's years.
Yeah.
And John Kennedy became president, and one of the things he wanted to do was to reduce taxes. And he actually bought this economic theory that it would stimulate business. And he couldn't get a tax bill through. And Lyndon Johnson succeeded him after the assassination, and Lyndon Johnson was a legislative genius. And he said, we can't take up civil rights until we get this tax bill out of committee, through the floor, and enacted into law. And Harry Byrd was from Virginia, the most conservative member of the United States Senate, Democrat, Southern Democrat, was chairman of the Finance Committee. And Johnson worked him over, and he said, Harry, if I can get this budget, the budget to be submitted for 1964, below $100 billion, folks, they spend $100 billion on 3 aircraft carriers these days, but below the federal budget below $100 billion, will you report that out? That tax bill for reduced taxes. He did. And that's how we got the first tax reduction since before World War II.
Right.
So
that's what good conservative Republicans, good conservative Democrats, deficit hawks, right?
Right.
We're happy with 90% tax rates.
They were happy with 90% tax rates. We had, I think, in one year when Eisenhower was president, in 2 years, 53 to 55, we had a Republican House of Representatives, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president, but no reduction in the 90% rate. So it will be interesting in this juxtaposition on what these folks in Millinocket, East Millinocket, who voted for Trump think they're going to get, and what the Republican establishment wants to give is a very interesting thing. But as you say, it doesn't make any difference. What they're trying to do is just blow up the system.
Yeah. Do you think this was a Trump win or a Republican win?
Well, I think it was a Trump win. I think most of the Republicans I know voted. They said, well, I'm a Republican. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. He's the Republican nominee. I think they would have voted for anybody, Genghis Khan, Hitler, if he was a Republican nominee. Very important, because that's part of this partisanship that has grown exponentially since the mid-90s.
Yeah.
When I worked in Washington, when I worked in the White House, did not have that kind of partisanship. We had partisanship, but we had Everett Dirksen, the Republican leader of the Senate, saying to the president, Lyndon Johnson, I don't like this, but I think we ought to go with it. This is a good compromise. I'm an American first, and we have to succeed. I'm a Republican somewhere down the line, but I'm American first.
Right.
Now these folks are Republican and Democrat first.
I'm going to get killed on Twitter.
Yeah, or I'll get killed on Twitter.
Yeah.
One thing that I read here when I read this thing from Andrew Sullivan in the beginning is even the liberals are going to get more radicalized.
Right.
You believe that?
I do, because you look at the last couple of Republican presidential candidates, in the aftermath, the conservatives said, we didn't get a real conservative. You know, Mitt Romney was too middle of the road. John McCain was too middle of the road, and that's why we lost. So there was I think you'll start seeing a lot the same kind of thing with Democrats. People saying, you know, if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren had been the nominee, there would have been a clear contrast, and they wouldn't have been seen as the candidate of the status quo. And so, yeah, I think there will be a lot of conversations in that portion of the party about you know, where they belong in terms of the prominence. But do you see Russ Feingold lost?
Yeah, he lost.
Yeah, which I mean, he was going to be like a key part of that coalition.
And you see, these Republicans, they got in the habit of knocking off people in primaries if you didn't cooperate.
Right.
If you weren't conservative enough, if you tended to be too moderate, we'll knock you off in a primary. Democrats are going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Knock off people who don't meet the litmus test. And you can do that with the way they've gerrymandered so many of these districts.
Right.
Now, in a place like Maine, will ranked choice voting be helpful?
I think so. I do, because we have this history of multi-candidate elections, especially for governor. Mm-hmm. But I think we'll see how it works out. I mean, it's first of all, it's going to have to go through a lot of legal challenges, I guess. There's a strong argument that it's not permitted under the Constitution. So I mean, there may need to be a constitutional amendment.
Who would challenge it?
Well, I think you'd have to lose an election that you were ahead in the first round.
Yeah.
It might never happen. You might never get to that point. I think what it will help is right now there's so few people participating in the party primaries in terms of voters.
Yeah.
A lot of candidates, very few voters, and so a narrow slice of the electorate picks the nominee, and the nominee comes into the process with a lot of weight. You know, Democrat, Republican, it's really hard to run against one of them. And we've seen people do it successfully and unsuccessfully. And it takes a lot of money, a lot of organization, and it creates this whole dynamic where you don't want to vote for the third party candidate, or who's the spoiler? Is it the Republican, or is it the Democrat, or is it the independent? So that kind of thing. In the last gubernatorial election, we talked of little else other than what share of the vote would Elliott Cutler get in relation to Mike Michaud, and very little about who would be the best governor of the three. And Paul LePage just kind of sailed in his lane and really didn't try to speak to the voters.
Right.
They were going to the other two. And, you know, it turned out to be a winning strategy for him.
The theory of ranked choice voting is using that example, that gubernatorial race as an example. You had these two, you had the Democrat and the Republican.
Right.
And Cutler. Yeah. And Cutler would have been the choice, the second choice of many of those Republicans and Democrats.
Right.
It wouldn't have been the guy from the other party.
Right.
Because of partisanship.
Right.
So he would have been ranked second. So if nobody got a majority in the first round, then they would...
Which they didn't. I mean, assuming the votes...
Yeah. Then they would count first and second choices and drop out the one...
No, what they do is they drop out the third, and then they look at his voters' second choice.
Okay.
Right. So
Cutler would have got dropped out.
So Cutler would have gotten dropped out in that one.
Yeah.
And in 2010, it would have been the opposite. It would have been Libby Mitchell who would have been dropped out.
And it would have been Cutler against LePage.
Right. And then they hand
that
out.
would have changed
they
the
hand
course
out
of
the
Maine
votes.
history.
Yes, it would have. Yeah. Right. So they hand out the votes to the survivors, and then they count them again. So you hear a complaint: why is the losers' votes given more weight than somebody who voted for the leader? But your vote is counted a second time. Yeah. It's like a runoff. and they're assuming that you'd want to stick with your first choice.
And of course, it doesn't. The voter doesn't do anything. The voter just goes to the voting booth, ranks his choices, and he's done with the process.
Right, right. It's very simple from the voters' end. It gets really complicated on the counting end.
Were you surprised it won?
Yes, I was, because it's complicated. It's hard to explain. And
you think it's a good idea?
I do think it's a good idea.
I do too.
And we have it in Portland, and we've only used it twice. And one time we had 15 candidates, and I thought it worked great. And when they went through the runoffs where they eliminated the last place candidate, 14 times, there was never one time where anybody moved up on the list. People have this idea that you could somehow go from 13th to 1.
Yeah.
You can't. You gotta have the most votes, or otherwise you lose.
Hey, so let's talk about another one of these referenda issues. A lot of Trump people, voters, must have voted for legalizing marijuana.
I'm sure they did. Yeah.
They had to. So if you're a Trump voter, you're into law and order and nuking people in the Middle East and whatever. You're also for some of them for legalizing marijuana.
Anti-establishment, I guess. We haven't done but I bet there is.
Anti-establishment.
Don't tell me what to do.
That's a possibility. Were you surprised that background checks for guns went down?
Not really, because when it turned into this whole question about loaning guns and the complexity of it, I think that's what happened. That's what kills referendum questions, is when they seem too complicated, and they are complicated, because they're you don't just pass a law that's 2 or 3 lines long. They're usually lengthy documents with lots of legal language in them, and people start analyzing them and arguing about them, and it's what the legislature is supposed to do. But when people started pulling out, they've taken they've redefined transfer. It comes from a different statute that affected juveniles, and now it affects adults. And once that kind of argument goes along, people have a reason to vote no. Right? It gives people an excuse to vote no. That it's in Maine, it's well-established cultural phenomena that people want gun rights.
Do you know whether it passed in Nevada?
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't.
It'd be interesting to find out whether it did. And I think this. Do you know whether more or less people voted in Maine this year?
I haven't seen a final tally, but I was just doing a little math, and it looks like fewer people voted, at least in the presidential race. That was Hillary Clinton had about 50,000 fewer votes than Obama did in 2012.
That's amazing.
And,
small state like this, she had 50,000 fewer votes.
And
what about the Republican?
He had actually more. He had about 30,000 more than Romney.
Than Romney.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting.
From 2012, and nationally, they're saying 7 million Democrats lost 7 million votes between the 2 elections.
So people say, and there are people out there that would want me to ask you, you think that this Trump sweep, is that the end of the Democratic Party?
Well, last week we would have been saying it's at the end of the Republican Party, right?
Exactly right.
I think both parties have a real identity problem. I don't really know, what a Democrat or a Republican is right now. Are Republicans the party of small government and lower taxes? Like you said, I don't think so.
Right.
Not all of them are. And the Democrats, I think, have to recognize that there's something that's not connecting. That Obama was able to put together this very intricate, complicated coalition of lots of different groups. And when they tried to pass it off to another candidate, she didn't have that string that could bring them all together, and just couldn't get the enthusiasm.
Yeah, and that raises the other issue. When in Obama's elections, I got in the habit after the election of looking at county votes in the South.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit familiar with some of the places in Mississippi and Alabama and Texas, particularly Texas. And in mostly white precincts, he would get 8% of the vote, 9% of the vote. His opponent, either McCain or Romney, 91, 92% of the vote. Clearly racial.
Yeah.
Clearly racial. And it seems that now the Democrats are this amalgamation of African Americans, now Latinos, because this guy he's no friend of theirs, and immigrants, people of color, and now people at the top of the rung. I mean, even Wall Street people, whatever, are now
environmental groups.
Environmental groups,
you know, all the identity groups. So
that's who they are.
And it's complicated, right? It's how do you...
And all the rest, the white people, all the white people are for the Republican.
Right. And we've been hearing for 4 years that there's no future in being the party of the white people.
Yeah.
Except yesterday there was.
It was.
Yesterday that was the winning combination. The white voters made up 70% of the electorate yesterday, up from about 65% the previous presidential race.
Here we are in the year 2016.
Yeah.
And we've progressed in so many fronts. We've done so many great things as a nation. Technology has expanded.
Yeah, yeah.
People's lives generally are better. And we just talked about our two major parties and said one is the party of white people, and the other is the party of all the other people.
Everybody else.
Yeah. It boggles the mind.
Yeah.
Oh. So we haven't made much progress on that front. Mm-hmm. Well, Greg, I wish we had even more time. An hour's gone by. It's hard to believe.
Yes, it is.
But I hope you'll come back again.
Oh, absolutely.
You have a lot of information in your job. You know, you write editorials. You look at a lot of editorial content, including letters to the editor.
Yes, I do.
You got to know.
I could do a whole hour on that.
On letters to the editor.
Yeah.
You use them all?
No, can't. You know, get way more than we could ever use.
Yeah. And you have some regulars. I know there's a guy out in Scarborough, Walter Eno.
Walter J. Eno. Yeah, he's great. He's a very good writer.
He is a good writer.
I hope he's watching this.
Yeah,
he's a very good writer, very conservative.
Right, very conservative. Yeah. He'd be for Trump, and the irony is Trump's no conservative.
Well, you know, he actually bailed on Trump because for moral reasons he felt he couldn't support him.
All right, that doesn't surprise me. Thank you very much.
Okay,